Hello, my name is P.J. CAPOSEY. I'm Superintendent of Schools for Meridian CUSD 223 in Northwest Illinois. The intent of this presentation is to answer the question that my board asks me frequently, and that is, what questions should we be asking? This presentation focuses on the adoption of an annual budget, but this goes for a lot of different areas. One of the things that we often forget is that as full-time school employees or school leaders, our boards are not necessarily versed in the intricate details of all things school finance or all things curriculum. So one of the best skills that board members can learn is what questions to ask and at what times. And so after a couple of years of discussing with my board, I'm kind of compelled at this point to start put together a presentation series and publish it out there of questions that I think boards should be asking their superintendents to get a better grasp of what's going on and to provide some accountability measures as well. So when we're talking about the budget, the biggest and first question that I would always encourage boards to ask is, what is the operating reserve and how does this year impact it? So the overall operating reserve in Illinois, which does school finance differently, but it's essentially what we pay monthly bills out of. So for us, there's four funds that takes place out of. That's out of working cash, transportation, operations, and maintenance. Operations and maintenance is one fund, and then education. So those four funds, what is our operating reserve? So for us, our minimum threshold is that we want to be at least at 25% of what we spend in a year in those four funds in the bank. Ideally, the most healthy, we'd like a full year. But it's the continuum, like people would always say with your personal finances, you want 3 months in the bank. For us, we want a year in the bank, but we need at least 3 months because of the non-linear nature of which bills, payroll occur compared to how we receive payment, either from state taxes, from federal revenue, from our local property tax. So that comes in a non-linear fashion. So we want at least 25% of the year in reserve. Second question is, how does this year impact it? So we can show a surplus budget in some cases that actually has a deficit budget in the operating funds. And so if boards aren't asking those questions, it's very easy to look good on paper and say, oh, we have a $150,000 fund balance anticipated at the end of the year. But when you look at the operating, it might be a negative 150. If that's what we're indicating, that's a really poor trend that the board needs to be aware of. Second is just generally say what trends are occurring. So does this mean that we are consistently spending less each year because we're being very fiscally conservative and making reductions? Is it that we're gradually increasing expenditures but we are being outpaced by additional funding because our enrollment is growing so quickly, or the EAV is increasing because we have great funding coming through as a result of our local property value? Your superintendent will know what trends are occurring. So when I look at the trends within my own local district, it'd be very easy for me to say that our EAV is slowly growing, but our enrollment is kind of rapidly decreasing. And so those two things will meet in the middle, and we're going to have to make some decisions based on that. It's a very easy question for most superintendents to answer. It will spur great conversation, and it's not a gotcha question at all. This is a very open-ended question that should give your superintendent or your chief school business official something to go off of and really make a statement that aids the board or the community in understanding the actual situation taking place in the district. This is a huge one. Does our budget match our priorities? That should be the number one question that superintendents ask themselves when they get done, and boards should be asking as well. So if this might seem like it's a very easy yes, because obviously our mission is to serve all kids and produce community contributors, etc. But this is more specific. So, for instance, our district is thinking about transitioning to very specific goals of having all kids at grade level by third grade in reading and by fifth grade in math, those being two central areas of focus. So for us right now, our budget is kind of equally distributed, that we want kids to be successful all over the place, and for being a financially strapped and conservative district, it makes it difficult to do anything except the norm. But if we're going to commit and say that third grade reading is what we're really passionate about because that's what research tells us we should do, then we need to commit extra resources there. So this is not only a great check for boards to ask their superintendents, but a great check for boards to ask themselves. Too many situations occur where boards will get on boards and administration will talk about something like, we really value social emotional wellness, and then they cut counselors. So this is kind of a practice what you preach question that is really good for boards to use as a self-evaluation of themselves and as an assessment of if their superintendent is doing what he says is important to him and carrying out the mission as set forth by. So this one, again, this might be, because this is where my brain is so much at right now, but spending matching enrollment trends to me is the biggest way that boards can prevent finding themselves in crisis. So typically, when we look at schools that start deficit spending and get into a very poor situation, it's not because they're spending on frivolous things. Now, I'm sure that occurs. But typically what occurs is that they continue to increase their kind of fixed expenditures. So their teachers get an annual raise, the administration, the support staff get an annual raise. And this might be nominal, might be 1-2%. Gas, electric, internet, phone bills, those things all continue to increase. And then all of a sudden we'll have enrollment decrease, which enrollment bases a lot of the state funding for schools, and or other things stand still, like EAV. So if our spending continues to increase and our enrollment decreases, typically if our enrollment's decreasing, it's very hard to get additional revenue unless it's a time of where property value is exploding, which I don't really foresee in the next decade or so. So if your enrollment's decreasing and your spending's going up, that might work for a while, right? So if you're operating an $800,000 fund balance one year, it might be $600,000, then $400,000, but eventually something's going to occur. Something has to give on this. So this is the number one question that I would suggest boards to ask in terms of preventative medicine for budgets. Because if your enrollment's going down and your expenditures going up, at some point a tough decision is going to be made. And typically in schools, especially given the economic climate, there's not a lot of frivolous things where money's being spent. So to make significant cuts, it's usually in human capital. So if your enrollment's decreasing, expenditures are going up, the question has to be on the table as to, okay, how are we going to reduce our staffing levels to accommodate this dip in enrollment that's occurring? And then the last one is, what are we doing when we're looking multiple years out? So right now in my district, our operating reserves are right around 72-73%. We want to get it to 100%. But we have all these factors that are competing against it. First of all, we're in Illinois, so the school funding model and the volatility is crazy, and it's almost impossible to do long-term projections. But assuming things stay constant, we are faced with about a 3% or more decline in enrollment per year, which, when coupled with average healthcare increase and like a movement but no raise, so just a soft freeze for our teachers, to use that vernacular, which I hate, by the way, but to use that vernacular, that's about a $400,000 shift every year. And so even though we're healthy, that's going to become untenable in time unless we start to make changes to our staffing, changes to other spending habits, or changes trying to increase revenue in some way. And so this is so that's without doing a tremendous amount of work, right? Those are rough numbers to say roughly there's a $400,000 imbalance that occurs. All superintendents, chief school business officials can create those types of things. So the biggest thing is creating the argument. So if we assume state funding is at the same level, then what happens ABC? If we assume that EAV goes up through, these are all simple calculations that if given especially to your finance person ahead of time, they should be able to have prepared for you when you get time to a meeting. So hopefully this was informative. Again, the intended audience for this was not only school boards, but also school leadership, to questions that hopefully you should be asking yourself to parse through and be able to explain your budget in more than just numbers. So that's the biggest thing for growth, is I'm sure that all our superintendents and CSBOs are doing a great job in numbers, but how do we kind of wrap a narrative around it to demonstrate their understanding of the context of the situation and the context moving forward? Contact information is at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for listening, and make it a great day.